Here is another story that got Lily thinking about her life. In the vast kingdom of Avaris, power was the only language that mattered. The nobles did not build their thrones with love or loyalty. They built them with marriage contracts, each one sealed with ink, blood, and betrayal. Every year, the royal council arranged unions among powerful families to strengthen borders and silence rival clans. Daughters were never asked for their hearts, only for their dowries and their bloodlines. A princess's smile could buy peace, and a noblewoman's tears could unite two kingdoms. The capital city, Eldred, shimmered under the sunlight. Towers of white stone, gilded carriages, silk-draped courtyards. Yet beneath the beauty lay whispers of misery. Servants gossiped about brides who wept through their vows, and warriors who married strangers to secure armies they would never lead. Love was weakness. Duty was law. The people accepted it as fate, all except for a few who dared to dream differently. Among them was a young noblewoman named Selene Aravel, whose name would soon be spoken in both reverence and rebellion. She lived in a world where women were bargaining chips, and alliances were chains disguised as jewelry. But Selene's spirit did not bend easily, and in a land where every bride was bought, she would become the one who chose her own destiny. The news came on a quiet morning. A royal messenger arrived at House Aravel, his armor gleaming, his scroll sealed with the king's crimson mark. Everyone in the great hall stood still as Selene's father broke the seal. The wax cracked like thunder. By royal decree, the messenger read aloud, Lady Selene Aravel of Eldred shall be betrothed to Lord Darius Vane, High Commander of the Eastern Legion and Keeper of the Iron Pass. The hall erupted in gasps. Darius Vane, the man known for conquering lands and breaking enemies without mercy. He was twice Selene's age, a warlord cloaked in titles, feared even by the council that served him. Selene's mother's hands trembled as she whispered, "This is an honor." Her father smiled stiffly, already calculating the family's rise in influence. "An honor indeed," he repeated, though his eyes gleamed with greed, not pride. But Selene's heart froze. She had seen Darius once before, in a royal parade. A tall, imposing man with silver armor and cold, calculating eyes. There had been no warmth in his smile, only cruelty polished to perfection. He had dragged conquered captives behind his horse as the crowd cheered. Now that man would be her husband. She felt the weight of invisible chains clink around her wrists. The servants bowed. Her parents rejoiced. The kingdom would call it a union of peace. But Selene knew what it truly was, a sentence, not a marriage. As the messenger departed, Selene stood at the balcony, staring across the city's distant walls. The sky stretched endlessly beyond, a reminder that somewhere outside Avaris, freedom still existed. And in that moment, a quiet fire began to burn in her chest. For days after the royal decree, the Aravel estate buzzed with excitement. Servants hurried through marble halls with bolts of silk and trays of gold, preparing for what Selene's parents called the greatest honor our house has ever known. Her mother, Lady Mirena, oversaw the preparations like a queen herself, arranging gowns, jewels, and endless lists of noble guests. Her father, Lord Garin Aravel, received couriers and advisors, his smile wide, his words full of ambition. To them, Selene's marriage was not a union, it was a transaction. "Do you understand what this means, my daughter?" Lord Garin said one evening as they dined. The golden chandelier above them glimmered like captured sunlight. "The Aravels will no longer be minor lords. Darius Vane commands the eastern armies. With him, our influence will stretch from the capital to the borderlands." Selene set down her cup of wine, her fingers trembling slightly. "Father, he is not a kind man. People whisper of how he treats his soldiers, how he burns villages." Her mother cut her off sharply. "Enough, Selene. He is a great commander. You will learn to respect strength. That is the way of noble life." Selene's voice softened, almost breaking. But what of love? Of choice? Lady Mirena's eyes hardened. Love does not keep a roof over your head. Love does not protect a house from ruin. Her father leaned closer, his tone final. You were born for duty, not dreams. The words struck her like a slap. She lowered her gaze, hiding the tears that threatened to fall. Around her, the hall felt colder, the candles flickering against walls that suddenly seemed too tight, too suffocating. That night, as laughter echoed down the corridors and her parents toasted to their fortune, Selene stood alone by her window, staring into the dark horizon. They saw her as a ladder to power, but she knew deep inside that this ladder led only to a cage. And she swore silently that somehow she would not let them decide her fate. Long after the candles had burned low and the house had fallen silent, Selene sat by her window, staring out at the moonlit city. From her high balcony she could see the winding streets of Eldred, the laughter of commoners in the taverns, the glow of lanterns swaying in the night breeze, the quiet hum of a world that lived without rules written in gold. She envied them. While the noble daughters of Avaris were groomed to smile, curtsy, and obey, the people beyond the palace walls lived freely, laughing when they pleased, marrying who they chose, and walking wherever their hearts led them. Selene pressed her palm to the cold glass and whispered, "If only I could trade places with them, just for a day." But even as she imagined it, the heavy reminder of her reality returned, the glittering cage of her birthright. Her dresses were fine, her meals exquisite, but every gift came with chains. Her father's approval, her mother's expectations, the kingdom's cruel law. Every girl she knew had accepted her fate. But Selene's soul refused to yield. She longed to run barefoot through fields, to ride beyond the city gates without an escort, to choose who she loved. In secret, she often sneaked to the old library tower, where her late governess had once told her stories of the wild lands. Forests untouched by men, rivers that roared with freedom, and mountains so tall they kissed the stars. There she had learned that beyond Avaris there were tribes who bowed to no king, who lived by the rhythm of nature rather than the demands of politics. Sometimes she would close her eyes and imagine herself there, standing beneath towering trees, breathing the scent of pine and rain, her silken gowns replaced by the freedom of the wild. But the dream always ended the same way, with her mother's voice calling her back, soft but sharp. "Selene, a lady does not dream of escape." Still, as she gazed out into the distance that night, something inside her whispered louder than fear. "A lady may not, but I will." And so began the first spark of rebellion, the one that would soon set her fate aflame. The night before her wedding was painted in gold. Golden candles, golden ribbons, golden lies. The Aravel mansion overflowed with nobles, each eager to praise the match between Selene and Lord Darius Vane. Musicians played sweet, hollow tunes as wine flowed like water, and the scent of roses filled the air thick enough to choke. Selene moved through the glittering crowd like a ghost, smiling when spoken to, bowing when expected, her heart locked behind a wall of quiet despair. Her wedding gown was displayed in the next room, a masterpiece of lace and silver thread. To everyone else, it was a symbol of honor. To her, it looked like a shroud. As the evening deepened, she slipped away to the balcony for air. The laughter of the nobles blurred behind her like distant thunder. She leaned against the cool stone railing, staring at the stars, wondering if any of them had ever belonged to someone like her, someone trapped by duty. That's when she heard voices. From the shadowed corridor beyond the balcony came the unmistakable growl of Lord Darius's voice, low and proud. "Tomorrow," he said to one of his commanders, "the girl will learn her place." Selene froze. His companion chuckled darkly. "The lady seems gentle enough, my lord. A beauty like that will obey easily." Darius's laugh was sharp, cruel. "Obedience is not given. It is taken. She's spirited, they say. That's fine. I enjoy breaking spirits." Selene's hand covered her mouth. Her heart pounded so hard she feared they'd hear it. Darius continued, voice dripping with arrogance. "Her father begged for this union. I could have refused. But why waste such a prize? Once she bears my crest, her will is mine. She'll learn that love is a word for fools." The men laughed. Selene's blood turned to ice. Every ounce of strength in her legs nearly gave way, but she held herself upright, trembling, furious, heartbroken. She had known Darius was cruel, but hearing him speak of her like property, like a horse to be tamed, shattered any lingering hope she had of finding peace and obedience. When the men's footsteps faded, Selene stood there in the silence, her eyes burning with unshed tears. Tomorrow she was meant to stand before the court as a bride. But now she knew, if she did, she would lose herself forever. As the moonlight spilled across her trembling hands, one thought took root in her mind, fierce and wild. I will not belong to him. I would rather face death than wear his chains. And with that vow, her fate began to change. That night, Selene sat alone in her chamber, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The reflection of a woman she no longer recognized. Her gown shimmered like starlight, jewels sparkled in her hair, and gold bracelets gleamed on her wrists. But beneath all that finery, she saw nothing but a prisoner dressed for display. Her heart still echoed with Darius's cruel words. Obedience is not given, it is taken. She rose from her seat and paced the room, her breath shallow. The walls seemed to close in around her. Every painting, every tapestry, every flickering candle a reminder that this house was no longer home. It was a gilded cage. Her fingers trembled as she touched the window pane. Outside, the night stretched endless and free, the sky vast, the forest shadows whispering in the distance. Could she run? Could she truly leave everything behind? Her title, her family, her safety. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. Love does not keep a roof over your head. And her father's. You were born for duty, not dreams. She clenched her fists. Then I choose the dream, she whispered. The fear was still there, sharp and cold. But something stronger rose beneath it. Courage, born of desperation. If she stayed, she would be destroyed. If she left, she might die. But at least that death would be hers to choose. So she made her decision. She would flee. Before the dawn, before the vows, before the first bell of the wedding told her life away. That night, for the first time in her 20 years, Selene decided to disobey everything she had ever been taught. When the household finally fell silent and the last of the guests had left, Selene moved quickly. Her pulse beat like thunder in her ears. She stripped off her jeweled gown and dressed in plain linen, garments once belonging to a servant girl. Her hands shook as she packed a small satchel, a loaf of bread, a flask of water, a few silver coins, and her mother's old dagger, a relic from her youth before marriage had softened her spirit. Then she took the dark cloak that hung by her window, its hood deep enough to hide her face. The moonlight flooded her room as she looked around one last time. The silken sheets, the mirror framed in gold, the ivory comb on her vanity. Everything that had defined her life now looked meaningless. She whispered to the empty room, "Goodbye, Selene Aravel." With a final breath, she pushed open the balcony doors. The air outside was cold, sharp, alive. She climbed down the ivy-wrapped lattice, her slippers damp with dew, her cloak catching the wind like wings. Below, the garden stretched wide, quiet, guarded by sleeping roses and statues of forgotten saints. Beyond its iron gate lay the forest, a dark sea of trees that no noble dared enter. She slipped through the servants' path and reached the stables. A single mare, soft-eyed and restless, stood waiting. Selene stroked her mane, whispering, "Just for tonight. Take me away." By the time the moon reached its highest point, the lady of House Aravel had vanished, swallowed by the darkness, by the whispering woods, and by the promise of freedom she had longed for all her life. Behind her, the palace slept, unaware that its perfect daughter had just rewritten her destiny. The night air was cool and heavy with silence. The grand halls of House Aravel, once alive with laughter and music, now lay asleep beneath the weight of the coming dawn. In her room, Selene moved like a shadow, calm on the outside but trembling within. She stripped off her jewels, each clink sounding louder than thunder in her ears. The diamond necklace that had once been her mother's fell onto the table, catching a glint of moonlight before settling into stillness, a symbol of everything she was leaving behind. Her silk gown followed, replaced by a plain brown tunic, stolen from her maid's trunk. The fabric was coarse, the fit imperfect, but it felt real, free from the suffocating grip of royal tailoring. She bound her hair, once brushed to golden perfection, into a loose braid and pulled a dark hooded cloak over her shoulders. Her heart pounded in her chest as she looked into the mirror. A noble lady no longer stared back, but a runaway, determined and defiant. Selene grabbed a small satchel from her bedside. Inside, she packed only what she could carry: a heel of bread, a water flask, and a silver dagger that had once belonged to her grandmother, now gleaming faintly in the candlelight. She hesitated for only a moment before blowing out the flame. Darkness swallowed the room. Moving to the balcony, she pushed open the heavy glass doors. The wind greeted her like an old friend, cool against her flushed cheeks. Below, the garden stretched out, rows of marble statues, the perfume of night-blooming flowers, and beyond them the dark outline of the forest that called to her. For a long moment she stood there, her hands gripping the railing. Everything in her life had been decided by others: what to wear, what to learn, who to marry. But this one choice was hers alone. Taking a deep breath, she climbed over the edge and began her descent down the ivy-wrapped lattice. Her fingers slipped once, bark scratching her palms, but she didn't stop. Her cloak brushed against the stone, her breath coming quick and shallow. When she reached the ground, the night seemed to hold its breath with her. Selene slipped through the garden paths, past the sleeping roses and still fountains, until she reached the old servant's gate. It was rusted, half hidden by vines, long forgotten by her family, but remembered by her. She pressed her shoulder against it, and with a soft creak it opened. Beyond it lay the world she'd never known, moonlit fields stretching toward the black mouth of the forest. She turned once, looking back at the towering walls of her home, the place that had given her everything but freedom. Her eyes burned with unshed tears as she whispered, "Forgive me, Mother, but I won't live as a prisoner." Then she drew her hood tighter and stepped into the night. The wind rose, carrying the scent of rain and pine. The stars watched silently as Lady Selene Aravel vanished into the darkness, leaving behind her title, her name, and the life that had never truly belonged to her. The deeper Selene walked, the darker the world became. The moon, which had guided her steps from the castle walls, was now swallowed by the thick canopy of ancient trees. Their branches twisted above her like gnarled hands, their leaves whispering in voices only the wind could understand. This was the Wraithwood Forest, the land people spoke of in hushed tones, a place of curses, beasts, and men who had long abandoned the laws of the kingdom. No noble dared enter, no servant dared wander near. Even the soldiers of Lord Darius kept their patrols at its edge, claiming the forest had eyes that stared back. Yet Selene pressed on. Her boots sank into damp moss, the earth soft beneath her trembling feet. Every crack of a twig made her flinch. The scent of pine and decay filled the air, thick and wild, nothing like the perfumed gardens she had known. She could still hear her father's voice echoing in memory. "Never stray into the Wraithwood. The wolves there are not mere beasts. They belong to the rogues, cursed men who hunt in the dark." But fear, for once, was not enough to stop her. She had escaped one kind of monster already, a man with wealth and power, but no soul. Whatever lay in this forest could not be worse than the life she'd fled. Still, Unease coiled in her chest. The night seemed alive here. The rustling of leaves sounded too deliberate, the silence between too heavy. Once or twice, she thought she saw movement, a flicker of glowing amber eyes watching from the underbrush. Her pace quickened. Branches clawed at her cloak, thorns snagged her skirt, but she refused to stop. The cold bit at her cheeks, her breath forming small white clouds that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Then from the distance came a low, haunting howl. It rolled through the forest like thunder, deep and mournful, the call of something powerful, something primal. Selene froze. Her heart leapt into her throat. There was no mistaking it. The tales were true. Somewhere in the darkness, wolves ran free. Another howl answered the first, closer this time. Then another, until the air itself trembled with their chorus. Her hands shook as she clutched the dagger at her waist, its silver blade catching a faint glimmer of moonlight through the trees. "I won't go back," she whispered to herself, her voice breaking, "not even for my life." And so she moved forward, one step then another, deeper into the wraithwood. The howls faded into an eerie silence, as if the forest were waiting, holding its breath. The shadows seemed to shift around her. The air grew colder, thicker. Something, or someone, was watching. Selene couldn't see it yet, but the forest had already chosen her. Behind her, the night exploded with sound. Shouts, torchlight, the clang of armor cutting through the silence. Selene froze for a heartbeat, her breath catching in her throat. The glow of flames flickered between the trees far behind her. Lord Darius's guards. They had found her trail. The dogs' barking echoed like a death knell through the forest. Spread out, she couldn't have gone far. The Lord wants her alive, barely. Their voices were jagged with authority and cruelty, men used to hunting prey that didn't fight back. Selene's pulse raced. She turned and ran, her cloak snapping behind her like wings torn by the wind. The forest floor was uneven and treacherous. Roots curled like serpents, stones slick with moss. Every stumble sent pain shooting up her legs, but fear pushed her faster. The torches grew brighter. She could hear the metallic clank of swords, the crunch of boots crushing leaves. One wrong move, one loud breath, and she'd be dragged back in chains. Her lungs burned, her body screamed for rest. But the thought of Darius's cold smile, the way he had spoken of breaking her spirit, drove her forward through the choking dark. A branch snapped near her left. She spun around. A shadow moved, too tall, too fast. "Over there!" a guard bellowed. Selene bolted in the opposite direction, darting through a curtain of hanging vines. Her skirt tore on a branch, but she didn't stop to free it. Her dagger slipped from her hand into the mud, lost. The barking grew louder. Then came the pounding of hooves. Riders. They were closing in. Heart hammering, she veered off the path, diving into the deeper part of the woods where the moonlight barely reached. The torches began to dim behind her, swallowed by the dense mist rising from the forest floor. A branch whipped her cheek, drawing a thin line of blood. She hardly felt it. "Stop! You'll never get out alive!" one of the guards shouted. His voice sounded closer than it should have. Selene pressed her back against the trunk of a tree, forcing herself to stay still. Her heart drummed so loud she was certain they could hear it. She bit her lip until she tasted blood. The guards passed, 3 of them, torches held high, blades gleaming. Their light flickered across her hiding place for an instant, but they didn't see her. When their voices faded into the distance, Selene exhaled shakily, tears of relief mixing with rain and sweat on her face. But just as she began to move again, the forest erupted with another sound, deeper, wilder, a howl. This one was much closer. The guards stopped too. "What in hell?" one muttered before being cut off by a scream. A blur of darkness crashed through the trees, followed by snarls and the sound of tearing flesh. Torches hit the ground. The men's cries echoed, sharp and short, until silence fell once more. Selene clutched her cloak tighter, trembling. She didn't know what hunted in these woods, but it was no ordinary wolf. The forest had turned on her pursuers, and for now she was spared. She turned and stumbled deeper into the night, not realizing that something unseen was now tracking her steps. The night exploded in chaos. One moment the guards were shouting, searching, swearing, and the next, something massive burst from the darkness like a shadow given life. A deep growl rumbled through the air, so powerful it vibrated in Selene's chest. The torches flickered wildly as the men turned in confusion. And then it came. A flash of fur, dark as midnight, eyes burning with silver fire. The wolf moved faster than any creature she had ever seen. It wasn't the size of a normal beast. This one stood nearly as tall as a man, its muscles rippling under the moonlight, claws slicing through the mist like blades. One guard swung his sword, shouting, "Monster!" The wolf leapt, its jaws clamped around his arm, dragging him down with terrifying strength. Another guard charged, only to be flung aside like a rag doll. Bones cracked, screams echoed. Selene watched in frozen terror, clutching the trunk of a tree. The forest was alive with fury, snarls, growls, the sounds of men begging for mercy. The beast's movements were almost purposeful. It wasn't killing for hunger. It was protecting something. Within minutes, silence returned. The torches lay scattered, half buried in the mud. Blood stained the leaves, steaming in the cold air. The wolf stood in the clearing, its chest heaving, eyes gleaming through the smoke. Then slowly, deliberately, it turned its gaze on Selene. Her heart stopped. Those eyes, not just silver. There was intelligence in them, power, pain. They studied her the way a man might, not prey, not threat, something else. Selene took a shaky step back, her boot sinking into the mud. The wolf's ears twitched. Please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't hurt me." For a moment the beast didn't move. Then, to her shock, it lowered its head, as if acknowledging her fear. Rain began to fall again, soft and cold, washing away the blood around them. The wolf turned, casting one last glance her way, and vanished into the dark forest. Selene collapsed to her knees, breathless, tears mixing with rain. It had saved her. She didn't know why or what kind of creature it truly was, but one thing was certain. She owed her life to it. And somewhere deep in the shadows, the rogue alpha, in his wolf form, watched her from afar, his instincts raging. She doesn't even know, he thought, the bond already pulsing between them. The rain fell harder now, washing the blood from the clearing, muting every sound except the steady drip of water and the ragged rhythm of Selene's breathing. She didn't know how long she sat there, trembling beneath the trees. Her limbs were weak, her body sore, and her mind dizzy from exhaustion and fear. But far beyond her sight, deeper in the forest's heart, the wolf that had saved her slowed his steps. He padded silently through the wet ferns, each movement controlled, deliberate. His silver eyes still glowed faintly in the darkness. Steam rose from his fur and his breaths came heavy, almost human. When he reached the edge of a hidden glade, he stopped, lifting his head toward the sky. For a moment, he stood perfectly still. Then his form began to change. Bones cracked, muscles twisted. The sound was both brutal and mesmerizing. The raw magic of the wolfkin, a secret only the ancient bloodlines carried. The great beast shrank, reshaping itself, fur giving way to skin, claws retracting into fingers. When the transformation ended, a man stood where the wolf had been. He was tall, broad-shouldered and carved with the kind of strength born from survival, not vanity. His chest rose and fell with restrained power, every scar telling a story of battle and betrayal. A long mark slashed diagonally across his back, the kind only an alpha could survive. His dark hair clung to his temples, wet from the rain, and those same piercing silver eyes gleamed beneath the fringe, now distinctly human, but no less fierce. Kaelen, the rogue alpha. To most, His name was a whisper of fear. The exiled leader of a fallen pack, the wolf who refused the crown and vanished into the wilds. But in truth, Kaelen had not vanished. He had been watching, waiting. And tonight, fate had brought a stranger, a fragile, desperate girl, straight into his territory. He closed his eyes briefly, inhaling deeply. Her scent lingered in the rain, jasmine, fear, and defiance. A noble's scent, a runaway. Yet beneath it was something else, something ancient and dangerous that stirred his instincts. "Who are you, little runaway?" he muttered under his breath, his voice deep and rough from disuse. He looked toward the direction of the clearing where she had fallen to her knees moments ago. His jaw tightened, his thoughts at war. He should have left her. Humans weren't his concern, not anymore. But there was something about her, the way her eyes had met his, unflinching despite her fear. It had awakened something he thought long dead. Kaelen turned toward the shadows again, the muscles in his back flexing as he began to move. He would keep watch, just for the night, he told himself, just until he knew she was safe. But deep down, he already knew. This woman was about to change everything. When dawn broke, it came gently. Pale gold light spilling through the leaves, glimmering off the mist that curled around the forest floor. Selene stirred, her body stiff and sore from the night's terror. For a heartbeat she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The escape, the chase, the wolf. She sat up quickly, heart hammering in her chest. Her cloak was damp, her hands cold, her lips trembling from exhaustion. She glanced around the small clearing, half expecting to see the beast emerge from the shadows again. But instead, she saw him. A man stood a few paces away, his back to her, crouched beside a small fire he must have built before dawn. The flickering light painted his broad shoulders and the faint outlines of scars down his spine. His dark hair was tousled and still wet, the tips catching the glow of the flames like strands of midnight silk. Selene froze, breath catching in her throat. He wasn't dressed like a nobleman. No fine silks, no polished armor. Just torn leather pants and a rough cloak that looked like it had weathered 1,000 storms. Yet there was something undeniably commanding about him, something raw and magnetic that made her heart stutter. The fire cracked softly and he turned his head. Silver eyes, the same ones that had gleamed through the darkness last night, fierce, intelligent, and impossibly alive. Her breath left her body. It couldn't be. The wolf that had torn through her pursuers. Was this man? He studied her quietly, his expression unreadable. "You're awake," he said, his voice low and gravelly, carrying that rough authority that made the air itself feel heavier. Selene scrambled back a little, clutching her cloak tighter. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Where's the wolf?" For a moment something flickered in his gaze, amusement perhaps, or something deeper. "Gone," he said simply. "You're safe now." Safe. The word felt like a fragile lie in his mouth. Her eyes darted to the scars on his arms, the raw strength in his movements, the faint scent of wild earth and smoke that clung to him. Something about him stirred both terror and curiosity inside her. He wasn't just a man. She could feel it in her bones. "You," she began, her voice trembling. "You were there last night. You killed them." His jaw tightened slightly. "They were hunting you," he replied, his tone flat but not unkind. Selene's lips parted. Gratitude warred with dread. He had saved her life. But what was he? A man who could become a beast? A creature from the old forest legends her governess used to whisper about? "Why?" she asked finally, her voice soft, uncertain. "Why would you help me?" He looked at her for a long moment, the firelight reflecting in those silver eyes that seemed to see straight through her. "Because," he said, his voice barely above a murmur, "you were mine to protect." Selene's breath caught. She didn't know what he meant, or what fate had begun to weave between them. But in that moment, sitting across from the stranger with the wolf's eyes, she felt it, the pull of something ancient, dangerous, and inescapable. Selene's pulse quickened as she stared at the man, at Kaelen, his silver eyes glowing faintly even in the morning light. There was something about him that made the forest itself seem to hold its breath. She swallowed hard, struggling to keep her voice steady. "What do you mean I'm yours to protect?" Kaelen stood slowly, his tall frame casting a long shadow over her. His presence filled the clearing, calm yet dangerous, the kind of quiet power that came not from arrogance, but from dominion. When he spoke, his voice was low and rough, the tone of someone who rarely explained himself. "Last night when you looked at me and didn't run, the forest heard. The bond was sealed." Selene frowned, confusion and unease twisting in her chest. "Bond? What bond?" He met her eyes, and in that instant, the world seemed to still. "The ancient wolf law," he said softly. "It was written before kings ever ruled this land. When a human crosses paths with a wolf's soul and accepts its gaze without fear, that life becomes bound to the wolf's protection, until death, or until one breaks the vow." Selene's lips parted, disbelief flickering in her eyes. That's just an old story, a myth." Kaelen's expression hardened. "Do you think myths bleed, little runaway?" His voice was sharp enough to make her flinch, but there was no malice in it, only truth. He stepped closer, the scent of earth, rain, and wild pine surrounding him. His eyes never left hers. "I killed to keep you alive," he continued, quieter now. "The bond was already claimed when I chose to defend you. Whether you meant to or not, you accepted it when you looked into my eyes." Selene took a shaky breath, her heart racing. "So you're saying I'm tied to you now?" Kaelen gave a small, almost bitter smile. "It means no wolf or man in these woods can harm you, not while I still draw breath. You carry my protection whether you want it or not." The words hung in the air like a vow etched in stone. She stared at him, her thoughts spinning, bound by ancient law, protected by a stranger who turned into a beast. She had fled one prison only to fall into another kind of fate. "I don't want your protection," she said finally, forcing strength into her voice. "I just want to be free." Kaelen's gaze softened slightly, but his tone stayed steady, unyielding. "Freedom in this forest comes with a price. The moment you ran, you stepped into my world. And here, my law keeps you alive." The fire between them crackled, the sound filling the tense silence. For the first time since fleeing her old life, Selene wasn't sure whether she should feel grateful or terrified. Because deep inside her, something ancient stirred in response, something that whispered she had just become part of a story much older than herself. Selene's hands trembled as she rose to her feet, the firelight flickering between them like a fragile barrier. The weight of Kaelen's words pressed on her chest, the bond, the law, the protection she never asked for. "No," she said, shaking her head, her voice rising with defiance. "You don't get to decide that for me. I didn't ask for your protection. I didn't ask for a bond." Kaelen didn't move. He stood tall and steady, his gaze calm but unreadable. "Whether you asked or not," he said, "it's done." Selene's anger flared hotter. "You sound just like them," she snapped, her voice cracking. "Like Darius, like the council. Men who think they can control me because of some law, some vow, some—" Her voice faltered as she met his eyes. They weren't cruel like Darius's had been. They were steady, wild, and conflicted. But that didn't soften her rage. "I won't trade one cage for another," she said fiercely. "If you really meant to protect me, then let me go." Kaelen exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. The muscles in his shoulders tensed, as though he were holding something back. "You wouldn't survive a day out there," he said. "The forest doesn't forgive strangers. There are hunters, rogues, worse things than Darius's guards. You're safe here. I'd rather die free than live under another man's command, she spat, her voice trembling. The air between them thickened. For a moment, the Alpha's control slipped. His eyes flickered silver again, a warning glint in their depths. His wolf side stirred, restless at her defiance. Kaelen took a slow step closer, not threatening, but impossible to ignore. You think I'm your enemy, he said quietly. But if I let you go, Darius's men will find your scent before sunset, and next time, I won't be there to stop them. Selene's throat tightened. The truth in his tone made her chest ache, but her pride wouldn't let her yield. Then I'll take that risk. Kaelen's voice dropped to a low growl, not in anger but in instinct. You don't understand. The bond isn't just protection, it's connection. If you die, I'll feel it. If you're hunted, I'll know. Your life is tied to mine now, Selene. Breaking it could destroy us both. Her heart pounded. She wanted to scream at him, to call him a liar. But something in his voice, that strange pain beneath the strength, stopped her. Kaelen turned away, staring into the trees, his hands clenched at his sides. You can hate me for it, he said softly, but I won't release you into death. Not after what I saw in your eyes last night. Selene's anger faltered, replaced by a heavy, confused silence. She wanted freedom. But in that moment, looking at the man who had killed for her, who spoke like a beast cursed by duty, she wasn't sure what freedom even meant anymore. The forest wind stirred between them, carrying the scent of rain and something else. Something wild and unspoken. For now she was bound to him, not by chains, but by fate itself. By the next morning, panic gripped the kingdom of Avaris. The great bells of the royal court tolled at dawn, echoing through the marble halls and bustling markets. Word traveled fast. The noble bride, Lady Selene Aravel, had vanished the night before her wedding. Her chambers were found in disarray, her bridal gown torn and abandoned. The guards at the eastern gate swore they saw no one leave, but tracks in the mud told another story, small footprints leading toward the forbidden woods. The court erupted in whispers. She ran. Impossible. No one survives the forest. Unless she was taken. Lord Darius Varen, the man she was to marry, stood before the High Council with a face carved in cold fury. His dark eyes burned beneath his jeweled crown as he slammed his fist onto the council table. She was stolen from me, he growled. No woman of my house would flee willingly. Around him, the nobles murmured, some fearful, some skeptical. The king's advisor, an old man with trembling hands, dared to speak. Perhaps, my lord. She sought escape. The match was... Darius's glare silenced him. She would not dare. Someone took her. Perhaps one of those cursed forest rogues. His words sent a chill through the room. The rogues, wolves without pack or allegiance, were the kingdom's oldest fear. Creatures of both man and beast, said to dwell beyond the borderlands. For decades they had been hunted and banished. But now the rumor of their return spread like wildfire. The royal heralds rode through the streets that same day, unfurling scrolls and shouting proclamations. By decree of Lord Darius, heir to the High Council of Avaris, the runaway noblewoman Selene Aravel is declared kidnapped by rogues. Any man who finds and returns her shall be rewarded with land and gold. Any who shelter her shall hang. Villagers whispered prayers. Others locked their doors, fearing the shadows that prowled the forest edge. Darius, meanwhile, paced the grand hall of his estate, his rage simmering into something darker. She will learn, he muttered under his breath, staring out the window toward the endless green horizon. No one escapes me. Not her, not even the wolves. He didn't know it yet, but the forest had already chosen sides. Far from the kingdom's marble walls, deep beneath the canopy of ancient trees, Selene sat by a small fire, wrapped in a borrowed cloak. The world believed she was a prisoner, But as she looked up at the mysterious man with silver eyes who watched her in silence, she wondered if, perhaps, she had just crossed from one cage into another. In the great council chamber of Avaris, the air hung thick with tension. Maps of the borderlands stretched across the table, covered in inked trails and blood-red markers. The nobles murmured in uneasy clusters while Lord Darius Varen stood at the head of the room, his eyes cold, calculating, and burning with fury. The candles flickered, reflecting off the steel clasp of his cloak as he slammed a dagger down onto the map. She was taken by rogues, he declared, and if the rogues dare to steal from me, then they have declared war. A few councilmen shifted nervously. One dared to speak. My lord, the forest is vast. Sending armies there would be costly. Are we certain the rogues were involved? Darius's lips curled into a hard smile. Do you think a delicate noblewoman survived those woods on her own? No. They have her. And they will pay for it. He leaned forward, his tone low and venomous. This isn't just about a runaway bride. This is about power. The rogues have lived in defiance of our laws for too long. To finish them once and for all. He turned toward the captain of his guard, a scarred man with cold eyes and a silver wolf fang hanging around his neck. Prepare my forces, torch the villages near the forest edge, flush them out. I want their leader's head before the next full moon. The captain bowed, a cruel grin spreading across his face. Yes, my lord. As the council dispersed, uneasy whispers filled the hall. Darius stood by the tall window overlooking the misty valley beyond the castle walls. The forest stretched there, endless, untamed, alive with secrets. He stared into the dark horizon, his reflection faint in the glass. You thought you could run from me, Selene, he murmured. But I'll burn the world if I must to bring you back. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the hunger in his eyes, not the hunger of love or loss, but of dominion. To the court, he would tell the story of a grieving fiancé reclaiming his bride. To himself it was vengeance, and to the wolves beyond the border, it was the first strike of a war long foretold. Unbeknownst to him, deep in that very forest, Selene sat beside Kaelen's campfire, the man Darius called a monster, as destiny began to weave its threads tighter around them both. The journey through the dense forest had been long and perilous, every step marked by shadows and the low growls of unseen wolves. But as dawn broke, the trees thinned, revealing a valley blanketed in mist, and there, tucked beneath towering cliffs, lay a village she never imagined existed. Selene's breath caught. Wooden huts built into the rocks, smoke rising from hidden fires and paths worn smooth by bare feet. Wolves padded quietly among the homes, their eyes intelligent, their movements gentle around the children who played without fear. It was not the savage den of monsters she had been taught to fear. It was a home. Kaelen walked ahead, silent as always, his presence commanding respect. Every villager who saw him bowed slightly, not in fear, but reverence. When he stopped at the heart of the camp, an older woman approached, her face weathered but kind. Two small children peeked out from behind her skirts, staring curiously at the newcomer in a torn silk gown. Another stray, Alpha? The woman asked softly. Kaelen's gaze flicked to Selene, then back. Not a stray. A guest. The word seemed to ripple through the camp, cautious, questioning. Rogues rarely took humans in, especially not nobles. Selene's heart pounded. She had expected hostility, maybe even imprisonment. But instead she was met with humanity, faces lined with hardship, yet softened by warmth. As she wandered through the camp later that day, she saw men repairing broken weapons beside women mending clothes. She saw laughter among the children chasing wolf pups through the grass, and she saw the scars, the missing limbs, the burned marks, evidence of people cast out, hunted, and punished for things beyond their control. One young girl, no more than 10, offered her a wooden cup of water. Selene smiled gently. "Thank you." The child grinned, showing a missing tooth. "Kaelen said you came from the castles. Is it true they have gold everywhere?" Selene hesitated. "Yes, but not joy." The girl tilted her head, uncomprehending, and darted off to play. Later, as dusk painted the valley gold, Selene sat near a fire, her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Kaelen stood across from her, speaking quietly to his lieutenants, the firelight catching the scar across his jaw. She watched him, the way he carried himself, the way the others trusted him. There was no cruelty here, only survival. And for the first time, the world her parents had painted, of noblemen as heroes and rogues as beasts, began to fracture. She looked around again at the people who had nothing yet lived with more dignity than the court ever had. "These are not monsters," she whispered to herself. "They're just forgotten souls, to finish them once and for all." He turned toward the captain of his guard, a scarred man with cold eyes and a silver wolf fang hanging around his neck. "Prepare my forces. Torch the villages near the forest edge. Flush them out. I want their leader's head before the next full moon." The captain bowed, a cruel grin spreading across his face. "Yes, my lord." As the council dispersed, uneasy whispers filled the hall. Darius stood by the tall window overlooking the misty valley beyond the castle walls. The forest stretched there, endless, untamed, alive with secrets. He stared into the dark horizon, his reflection faint in the glass. "You thought you could run from me, Selene," he murmured. "But I'll burn the world if I must to bring you back." Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the hunger in his eyes, not the hunger of love or loss, but of dominion. To the court, he would tell the story of a grieving fiancé reclaiming his bride. To himself it was vengeance, and to the wolves beyond the border, it was the first strike of a war long foretold. Unbeknownst to him, deep in that very forest, Selene sat beside Kaelen's campfire, the man Darius called a monster, as destiny began to weave its threads tighter around them both. The journey through the dense forest had been long and perilous, every step marked by shadows and the low growls of unseen wolves. But as dawn broke, the trees thinned, revealing a valley blanketed in mist, and there, tucked beneath towering cliffs, lay a village she never imagined existed. Selene's breath caught. Wooden huts built into the rocks, smoke rising from hidden fires and paths worn smooth by bare feet. Wolves padded quietly among the homes, their eyes intelligent, their movements gentle around the children who played without fear. It was not the savage den of monsters she had been taught to fear. It was a home. Kaelen walked ahead, silent as always, his presence commanding respect. Every villager who saw him bowed slightly, not in fear, but reverence. When he stopped at the heart of the camp, an older woman approached, her face weathered but kind. Two small children peeked out from behind her skirts, staring curiously at the newcomer in a torn silk gown. "Another stray, Alpha?" the woman asked softly. Kaelen's gaze flicked to Selene, then back. "Not a stray. A guest." The word seemed to ripple through the camp, cautious, questioning. Rogues rarely took humans in, especially not nobles. Selene's heart pounded. She had expected hostility, maybe even imprisonment. But instead she was met with humanity, faces lined with hardship, yet softened by warmth. As she wandered through the camp later that day, she saw men repairing broken weapons beside women mending clothes. She saw laughter among the children chasing wolf pups through the grass, and she saw the scars, the missing limbs, the burned marks, evidence of people cast out, hunted, and punished for things beyond their control. One young girl, no more than 10, offered her a wooden cup of water. Selene smiled gently. "Thank you." The child grinned, showing a missing tooth. "Kaelen said you came from the castles. Is it true they have gold everywhere?" Selene hesitated. Yes, but not joy. The girl tilted her head, uncomprehending, and darted off to play. Later, as dusk painted the valley gold, Selene sat near a fire, her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Kaelen stood across from her, speaking quietly to his lieutenants, the firelight catching the scar across his jaw. She watched him, the way he carried himself, the way the others trusted him. There was no cruelty here, only survival. And for the first time, the world her parents had painted, of noblemen as heroes and rogues as beasts, began to fracture. She looked around again at the people who had nothing yet lived with more dignity than the court ever had. These are not monsters, she whispered to herself. They're just forgotten souls. Presence of Kaelen, the rogue alpha. He was everywhere. When she woke at dawn, he was already patrolling. When she joined the others for training, he watched in silence, his gaze unreadable. At night, when the campfires dimmed and the world hushed, she could feel his nearness even through the walls of her tent. A presence that tugged at her senses like the pull of the moon. She told herself it was only gratitude. He had saved her life, offered her protection. That was all. But every time their eyes met, every time his voice brushed against her skin like gravel and smoke, something inside her stirred. One afternoon, she found him by the riverbank, washing blood from his hands after a border skirmish. The water ran red for a moment before clearing again. She hesitated before stepping closer. "You're wounded," she said softly. "It's nothing. You're bleeding, Kaelen." He looked up at her, then really looked. And in that moment, the world seemed to still. His amber eyes glowed faintly in the fading light, wild yet human, fierce yet gentle. "I've survived worse," he said, his tone low, almost a growl. Still, she knelt beside him, ignoring his resistance. With a strip torn from her sleeve, she bound the cut on his arm. Her fingers brushed his skin, hot, rough, alive, and her breath caught in her throat. He noticed. Of course he noticed. Kaelen's hand closed around her wrist, firm but not cruel. "Don't," he warned softly. "Don't what?" "Look at me like that." Selene's heart raced. "Like what?" His jaw tightened. "Like you don't know what I am." She pulled her hand free, trembling, not from fear but from the truth he forced her to face. He was dangerous, yes, a killer, a wolf, a man who had every reason to hate her kind. And yet, she couldn't stop thinking about him. At night, she lay awake in her tent, listening to the distant howl of his pack. Sometimes she imagined the sound came from him, a call that her heart, traitorous and unbidden, wanted to answer. She hated herself for it. He was everything she should despise, wild, untamed, a reminder of the chaos she'd been raised to fear. And yet when he smiled, that rare, fleeting thing, it was like the forest itself came alive. The more she fought the feeling, the stronger it grew. She found herself watching the way he moved, the way others deferred to him, the way even silence obeyed when he spoke. There was strength in him, yes, but also sorrow, a loneliness that mirrored her own. "You'll only get hurt if you care," she told herself one night. But her heart didn't listen. And when Kaelen's eyes found hers across the campfire, glowing like molten gold in the dark, she knew something was shifting between them, something neither law nor bloodline could undo. The night air was cold and still, heavy with the scent of pine and smoke. The rogues had long fallen asleep, their fires dimmed to glowing embers. Selene sat near the edge of camp, her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders, staring into the forest's shadows. Sleep would not come. Her mind churned with too many questions, too many feelings she didn't want to name. She didn't hear Kaelen approach until his voice broke the silence. "You shouldn't sit alone out here." She turned, startled. He stood a few feet away, half hidden in the moonlight, tall, silent, his presence commanding yet strangely comforting. I couldn't sleep, she murmured. The forest, it's loud. It's alive, he corrected softly. It speaks if you know how to listen. He moved closer, stopping just short of where the firelight reached. For a moment they said nothing. The only sound was the whisper of wind through the trees. Then she asked the question that had haunted her since the night they met. Why did you claim me? Kaelen's jaw tightened, his gaze flickering to the flames. You think I wanted to? Selene's voice trembled. You said I was bound to you, by law, by your pack's code, but you never told me why. Was it just instinct? Some wolf thing you couldn't control? He looked at her then, his eyes sharp, glowing faintly gold in the dark. You don't understand what would have happened if I hadn't stepped in that night. Darius would have taken you, he said, his tone low and rough. He's not a man. He's a serpent wearing silk. To him, women like you are tools. You'd have been chained to a throne, used to gain the crown's favor and discarded the moment he grew bored. His words hit her like cold water. You don't know that, she whispered. I do, he said firmly. I've seen what your kingdom does to those it claims. I've seen villages burned because they wouldn't kneel. I've seen men stripped of their honor, women branded as property. That's why I left their wars. That's why they call me rogue. Selene's throat tightened. So you saved me, out of pity? Kaelen took a slow step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. No, he said quietly. I saved you because the moment I saw you, I knew you didn't belong to them. You were standing in a cage, wearing chains made of gold. You looked ready to break. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. When I claimed you, I wasn't trying to trap you. I was trying to protect you. From Darius, from your court, from a world that would have swallowed you whole. She stared at him, her heart pounding painfully against her ribs. And what about you? She asked. You've bound me to you. Is that protection or another cage? For a long moment, he didn't answer. His expression softened, the fierce alpha giving way to something raw, almost vulnerable. If I wanted to cage you, he said, voice barely above a whisper, you'd already be chained. But I'd rather die than see you lose your fire. Selene's breath caught. The forest seemed to still around them. Even the wind held its breath. He turned away first, his silhouette melting into shadow. You're safe here, Selene. That's all that matters. But as he walked off into the trees, she felt the truth linger in the air between them. He hadn't just claimed her to protect her life. He'd claimed her to protect something in her that he recognized in himself. Defiance, freedom, fire. And perhaps without meaning to, he'd claimed her heart too. The next morning, sunlight filtered weakly through the canopy, scattering golden patches across the forest floor. Smoke from breakfast fires drifted between the trees, carrying the scent of roasted meat and pine resin. Yet, despite the calm of the camp, tension clung to Selene's chest like chains she couldn't break. Kaelen's words from the night before echoed in her mind. I claimed you to protect you. Protection. That was what everyone said before taking something from her. Her freedom, her voice, her will. Her father had said it when he arranged her marriage. Darius had whispered it when he boasted he'd make her obedient. And now Kaelen, the one man she thought different, had claimed her for her safety. By the time she found him near the training grounds, her anger burned steady beneath her calm exterior. Kaelen was sparring with two of his lieutenants, his movements fluid and fierce, the mark of a warrior born to lead. When he disarmed both with effortless grace, the watching rogues cheered. Selene didn't wait for the crowd to disperse. We need to talk, she said sharply. Kaelen turned, sweat glistening on his skin, his eyes narrowing at her tone. Now? Yes, now. The rogues sensed the tension and scattered, pretending not to eavesdrop. Selene crossed her arms, chin lifted. You said you claimed me to protect me, but that doesn't give you the right to own me. His brows furrowed. "I never said you were mine." "You didn't have to," she shot back. "You told your people I was under your claim. That means I can't leave. That means every look, every whisper, every decision about my life goes through you." Kaelen exhaled slowly, fighting to keep his temper in check. "That's not what I meant. Selene, you'd be dead or worse if I hadn't stepped in." "And what then?" she demanded, stepping closer. "I'm supposed to thank you for giving me a different kind of prison?" The words hit him harder than she expected. His eyes flickered with something, guilt, maybe even hurt, before he looked away. "You think I want to keep you here?" he said quietly. "You think I don't know what it's like to be trapped?" Selene hesitated but didn't soften. "Then don't make me one of your wolves. Don't decide what's best for me. You say you hate the kingdom for controlling others, but you're doing the same thing." Kaelen's jaw clenched. "If I hadn't claimed you, Darius would have marked you as his property. He would have—" "I know what he would have done," she interrupted, her voice cracking. "But I don't need another man deciding my fate. I want to choose for myself. For once in my life, I want to belong to no one." The forest went still. Even the wind seemed to listen. For a long moment, Kaelen said nothing. He simply looked at her, really looked, and saw not a fragile, noble girl, but a woman standing her ground, trembling but unbroken. Finally, he stepped back, his voice low but steady. "Then I won't stop you, Selene. But if you walk out of this camp, know that the kingdom will never stop hunting you. And Darius, he'll burn every village in his path to find you." She swallowed hard, meeting his gaze. "Then let him. I'd rather die free than live as someone's claim." Kaelen's eyes softened, pride and pain mingling there. "You're stronger than you think," he said quietly. "Maybe that's why the gods led you here." Then he turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the clearing, heart pounding, torn between fury and something far more dangerous, the pull she still felt toward him. As the morning breeze swept through the trees, Selene whispered to herself, almost like a vow, "No cages, not anymore." But in the shadows, unseen, Kaelen's gaze lingered, not as a captor watching his prize, but as a man who feared losing the one soul fierce enough to challenge him. That evening the forest camp buzzed with quiet activity, children laughing near the fires, hunters returning with game, and healers tending to the wounded from border patrols. But Selene stayed apart, sitting by the edge of a moss-covered log, her thoughts swirling like the mist rising from the trees. She had stood up to Kaelen. For once, she had said the words she'd been afraid to speak her entire life. And he hadn't punished her for it. He hadn't shouted or ordered her back to her tent or reminded her that she was under his protection. Instead, he'd walked away. Part of her expected him to return furious, to remind her of who he was, what power he held. Yet as the hours passed, a strange stillness settled over the camp. It wasn't anger she felt from him in the air. It was something quieter, something that felt almost like respect. She didn't see him again until nightfall. Kaelen appeared near the outer fire pit, his presence commanding as always. His warriors fell silent when he entered, their laughter fading into reverent stillness. But when his eyes found Selene across the camp, something shifted in his gaze, a trace of warmth breaking through the steel. He approached slowly, stopping a few feet away. "You spoke your truth," he said, voice low. Selene blinked, wary. "And you didn't like it." His mouth quirked into the ghost of a smile. "No, I did. Most people who've stood in front of me and talked like that are dead." She frowned, unsure if he was joking. "I'm not afraid of you, Kaelen." "I know," he said simply. "That's what I respect." He crouched beside the fire, tossing a stick into the flames. The orange light flickered across his scarred face, highlighting the hard lines softened by exhaustion and honesty. "The nobles in your world," he said quietly. "They bow and smile, but inside they're all the same. Greedy, cruel, hollow. They don't fight back, not unless it benefits them, but you burn. Selene's breath caught. Burn? You don't hide what you feel. You speak when it's dangerous. You stand your ground even when you're shaking. That kind of fire is rare. His tone wasn't mocking or seductive. It was reverent, almost protective. Selene wasn't used to being spoken to like that. All her life, men had told her to obey, to smile, to be grateful. Her father had praised her beauty, never her mind. Darius had admired her face, not her will. But Kaelen, a man the kingdom called a monster, looked at her like she was something powerful. You said you wouldn't stop me if I left, she murmured. Was that true? Kaelen's eyes met hers, fierce, unyielding. If you walk out of this camp, I won't follow, he said. Not because I don't want to, but because your freedom isn't mine to take. Her heart twisted at his words. He was still her protector, but in that moment he was something else too, an equal. Then why stay near me? She asked softly. He hesitated, then said, because your courage reminds me of who I used to be, before the crown turned me into a beast. They sat in silence for a while, the crackle of fire between them. Around them, the forest whispered. Wolves howled in the distance, their song haunting and beautiful. For the first time, Selene didn't see Kaelen as her captor, but as a man who carried the same scars she did, invisible, deep, and born of a world that tried to break them both. When she finally stood to leave, Kaelen rose too, but didn't stop her. He only said, Don't lose that fire, Selene. The world will try to put it out. Don't let it. And as she walked away, she realized something had changed between them, not a bond of dominance or protection, but of mutual respect. He was the first man who didn't want to silence her, and that, more than anything, frightened her heart, because it made her want to trust him. By the time the next full moon rose over the forest, whispers had begun to slither their way beyond the trees, whispers that would soon shake the kingdom. At first, it started with frightened merchants who passed near the borders. They spoke of a pale-haired woman seen walking beside a scarred man in wolf pelts, of her laughter echoing through the woods, of his hand resting protectively at her back. To those who saw them, they didn't seem like captor and captive. They seemed like mates. By the time the stories reached the nearby villages, the tale had grown teeth. The runaway bride who defied her lord has joined the wolves, one barkeep whispered. They say she's bewitched by the rogue Alpha. He's made her his queen, said another. Or maybe, an old hunter muttered, she chose him. The gossip spread like wildfire, crossing borders faster than soldiers could march. Within days, even the high halls of Avaris buzzed with scandal. In the Grand Council chamber, Lord Darius slammed his goblet against the table, the wine splattering like blood. Lies, he roared. She's a prisoner of that beast, not his mate. The courtiers lowered their gazes, but no one dared contradict him. They all knew that in the world of wolves, claiming meant more than capture. To be named a mate was sacred, unbreakable. Still, the rumor served a purpose. It humiliated him. It made him look weak. Darius's eyes burned with rage as he turned to his captain. Spread word through the villages, he hissed. Tell them she's been cursed, that the rogue Alpha has defiled a noble woman, corrupted her mind. We will rally the people through outrage. The crown will sanction our hunt. The captain bowed deeply. And the woman, my lord? When she's found, Darius said coldly, bring her back alive. I want her to kneel before the court and watch as the monster who touched her burns. But far from the venom of courts and politics, deep within the hidden heart of the forest, Selene knew nothing of the rumors. Life among the rogues had become something strange, something almost peaceful. She had begun to teach the rogue children to read using scraps of old books, and she often helped the healers gather herbs. Though she told herself she was only surviving, she couldn't deny how naturally she fit into this life. And yet, whenever she passed Kaelen, she could feel the air shift. He kept his distance, always respectful, always restrained. But their eyes met too often, lingering too long. The rogues noticed. So did the wolves. One evening, as she carried water from the stream, a young woman named Lyra smirked and whispered to her companion, "The alpha watches her more than the moon." Selene pretended not to hear, but her cheeks burned. That night she caught Kaelen by the fire, his gaze soft as he watched her laugh with the children. "You're becoming part of them," he said quietly when she approached. "They've made me feel welcome," she replied, then paused. "But the way they look at me, it's changed." "Because they think you're mine," he said, not looking at her. "And are you going to tell them otherwise?" Kaelen's jaw tightened, and for a heartbeat, he didn't answer. The firelight flickered across his scars, tracing stories she didn't yet know. "If denying it would keep you safe, I would," he said finally. "But the world has already chosen your story, Selene. Whether you believe it or not, they'll call you my mate." Her breath caught. "And what if I don't want that?" Kaelen's eyes lifted to hers, fierce, but filled with something deeper. "Then tell me to let you go," he murmured. "Tell me you don't feel the bond." Selene opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Because deep inside, where her fear and fire met, she did feel it, that pull between them, wild and undeniable. He stood then, his shadow tall against the moonlight. "I'll never chain you," he said softly. "But I won't apologize for protecting what the world wants to destroy." As he walked away, the whispers continued to grow beyond the forest, twisting truth into legend. The runaway bride was no longer a symbol of rebellion. She was now known as the rogue alpha's mate, the woman who chose the monster over the crown, and the kingdom would never forgive her for it. The grand hall of Avaris was filled with fury and whispers. Jeweled nobles gathered beneath golden chandeliers, fanning themselves not from heat, but from scandal. The portrait of Selene, once celebrated as the most graceful daughter of House Valen, now hung shrouded in black silk at the center of the chamber. "She fled on the eve of her wedding," hissed Lady Myron, her voice like a snake's coil. "A disgrace to her lineage," spat Lord Renar. "And now she lies in the arms of a beast, the daughter of Valen consorting with wolves." Gasps rippled through the court. Some pitied her, most did not. Selene's family, red-faced and trembling with humiliation, stood at the front beside Lord Darius, who wore a mask of solemn grief. To the crowd, he appeared the wronged noble, the man robbed of his bride by a monster. But behind his calm eyes, vengeance brewed. He placed a hand on her father's shoulder, voice low yet sharp enough for the room to hear. "Your daughter was misled, taken by savages who defy the crown. But I promise you this, I will bring her back, and the name of Valen will be cleansed." Her father's lips quivered, torn between shame and desperation. "She was our hope," he murmured, "and now, she's nothing but a stain on our crest." The nobles echoed his grief with murmurs of false sympathy. But beneath their words was hunger, hunger for a cause, for blood, for war. Lord Darius turned to the council. "Let us speak plainly," he declared. "The girl has betrayed her duty. By consorting with the rogue Alpha, she undermines every noble alliance. If this rebellion is not punished, our kingdom will rot from within." A chorus of agreement rose. "Traitor," someone shouted. "Burn the rogues," cried another. "Cleanse the shame she's brought upon her house." And just like that, Selene's name, once spoken with admiration, became a curse whispered behind fans and goblets. Throughout the realm, bards rewrote her story. The noble lady who ran from love became the traitorous bride who betrayed her kind. Mothers warned their daughters, "Never be like Selene of Valen. Never defy your duty." Even her family sealed their doors against her name. Her younger sister, Alara, watched servants tear down Selene's paintings, her dresses burned in the courtyard as symbols of dishonor. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered to herself, "Forgive them, Selene. They don't know what you've done or why." But deep in the shadowed forest, Selene felt the shift, not in her body, but in her heart. The air grew colder, and Kaelen's wolves grew restless. Scouts returned with grim news. "The nobles have declared you a traitor," said one. "Your house has denounced you. They march under Darius's banner." For a long time, Selene said nothing. The words struck deeper than any wound could. Finally, she looked up at Kaelen, eyes shimmering with pain but also fire. "So that's it," she said. "To them, I'm already guilty. A traitor to my blood. Then maybe it's time I stop trying to prove them wrong." Kaelen's gaze softened. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said, straightening, "if the kingdom calls me a traitor, then I'll show them what a traitor can do." Her voice carried across the camp like a spark in the wind. For the first time, the rogues didn't just see her as the Alpha's claimed woman. They saw a leader forming, one forged in exile and flame. Days turned into weeks within the hidden encampment, and Selene began to see life beyond the polished cruelty of noble halls. The rogues' camp was unlike anything she had known. Tents woven from hides, fires glowing through the night, laughter echoing between trees. Children played barefoot in the dirt, their hair wild, their smiles free. Warriors trained together in silence and respect, not out of fear, but loyalty. And everywhere she turned, there was Kaelen, silent, watchful, untamed. He didn't order her around. He didn't touch her without permission. Yet somehow his very presence unsettled her more than Darius's threats ever had. At first, Selene stayed on the edges, clutching her cloak and refusing food, insisting she would leave once the roads were safe. But each night, the forest grew louder. Wolves howling in the distance, hunters searching the shadows for her. And each night, Kaelen's pack stood guard, circling her tent like sentinels. One evening, a storm rolled over the forest. Thunder cracked the sky in two and rain poured through the trees in silver sheets. Selene huddled by the fire, her heart pounding with every roar of wind. Suddenly, Kaelen appeared at her tent's entrance, his hair drenched, his golden eyes glinting in the dim light. "You're afraid of storms?" he asked, his deep voice carrying over the rain. "I'm not afraid," she lied. "I just hate feeling trapped." He stepped inside, his scent of pine and smoke filling the small space. "You're not trapped here, Selene," he said quietly. "You're safe." The word safe hung in the air, unfamiliar and fragile. She wanted to scoff, to remind him she hadn't asked for his protection. But when lightning struck a tree nearby, shaking the ground, she found herself instinctively moving closer to him. Kaelen didn't touch her, not even when her fingers trembled inches from his. But his gaze softened, and his tone shifted from command to comfort. "Freedom doesn't always mean running," he murmured. "Sometimes it means resting, where no one can cage you again." That night, for the first time since she'd fled her wedding, Selene slept soundly, the sound of rain muffled by the warmth of the Alpha's camp. In the days that followed, she began to help the packs, heal or gather herbs, comfort the children, and even cook beside the women. She saw the rogues as people, not beasts, exiles who had been cast out by the same nobles who now hunted her. Yet the pull inside her didn't ease. Every time she laughed with the pack or caught Kaelen watching her with that unreadable expression, guilt pricked her chest. Was she betraying her family by feeling at home here? Or had they betrayed her first by selling her off like a pawn? One afternoon, while teaching a young girl to braid flowers, Selene noticed Kaelen across the field, training with his warriors. His shirt clung to his scarred skin, his movements fierce and precise. When his gaze lifted to hers, a jolt ran through her, a connection neither could deny nor name. And in that heartbeat, she understood her conflict. Kaelen's world frightened her because it felt too right, too real, too much like the freedom she had always dreamed of but never believed she could claim. Selene turned away, whispering to herself, "I wanted freedom, but I never thought it would look like him." The moon hung heavy that night, pale and watchful through the canopy of trees. The pack had gone silent. Only the soft crackle of the campfire and the rustling leaves broke the stillness. Selene sat near the flames, her fingers absently tracing the edge of a wooden cup, her mind crowded with unspoken thoughts. Kaelen sat across from her, sharpening his blade in silence. The firelight caught the faint scars running across his arms, marks of a life she didn't yet understand. She finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "You're not like them," she said. "The rogues follow you, but you carry yourself like someone born to command." He paused, the sound of metal against stone ceasing. His golden eyes lifted to hers, unreadable at first, then softened with something like resignation. "You see too much," he murmured. Selene leaned forward. "Then tell me, who are you really, Kaelen?" For a long moment, he didn't answer. The wind sighed through the trees, stirring embers between them. Then he set his blade aside and looked into the fire, his voice low and steady, the tone of a man reliving ghosts. "Once, I was heir to a kingdom called Arendor, the one your people call the Old North. My father was the High Alpha, ruler of all packs, sworn to keep peace between humans and wolves." Selene's eyes widened. You were royalty?" He nodded faintly, though there was no pride in his expression. "I was trained to rule, to protect the balance, but the council feared me. They said I was too wild, too loyal to the old ways. When my father died, they claimed I murdered him to seize the throne." Selene's breath caught. "Did you?" His gaze flicked to hers, sharp, wounded yet honest. "No. I loved him more than anyone. But truth means nothing when power is at stake. The council wanted a ruler they could control, so they branded me Rogue Alpha and cast me into the wilderness to die." The firelight flickered over his face, revealing the pain etched deep beneath the calm. "The men and women here, the rogues, many of them followed me into exile. They were the ones who refused to bow to lies. We built this place hidden and hunted because it's better to live free in the shadows than chained in gilded halls." Selene's heart ached. She saw now why his eyes held such sorrow, and why his strength was tempered with silence. He was not just a leader, he was a fallen king. "You were betrayed by those who feared your power," she whispered. "Just like I was forced to marry a man who wanted to use mine." Kaelen's gaze softened, meeting hers across the fire. "We are not so different, Selene. Both of us were raised to serve a crown that never deserved our loyalty." The words settled between them like a vow. For the first time, Selene saw the man behind the scars. Not just the fierce protector who had saved her, but the broken prince still, fighting to rebuild something worth believing in. "What will you do now?" she asked softly. "Take back what's mine," he said, his voice like iron. "But not through blood, through truth. And when I do, I'll make sure no one ever suffers what we did." The wind carried the howl of wolves through the night, a sound of loyalty, loss, and silent rebellion. Selene stared into the fire, feeling the ache in her chest shift into something else. Admiration, understanding, and a dangerous warmth she could no longer ignore. The morning after Kaelen's confession, Selene woke to the sound of steel clashing and voices calling across the clearing. The rogues were already awake, sparring, running, tending fires, their rhythm fierce but purposeful. Life here was survival, not ceremony. Selene stepped out of her tent, wrapping her cloak tighter around her shoulders. For days she had watched them, the warriors moving with precision, the women hunting with bows, even the children helping sharpen blades or gather herbs. They all carried a quiet strength she had never known. She thought of her old life, the silk dresses, the endless lessons on etiquette, the way her every move had been dictated by others, and she realized how useless that life had left her in the wild. If she wanted to live here, to truly belong, even temporarily, she needed to learn to fight. That afternoon, Selene approached Kaelen where he stood training a group of warriors. His back was turned, the muscles in his shoulders flexing as he moved with a predator's grace. When he turned at the sound of her footsteps, surprise flickered across his face. "You should be resting," he said, his tone mild but watchful. "I've rested enough," she replied. "Teach me." He studied her, the noblewoman in borrowed leathers, her chin lifted with stubborn defiance. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Very well, but you'll train like everyone else. No exceptions." And so her transformation began. The first days were brutal. She stumbled through forest drills, fell in mud, missed every target with her bow. Her hands blistered, her arms ached. The rogues laughed, not cruelly, but with the ease of those who had once been broken too. Kaelen didn't go easy on her. He corrected her stance, forced her to lift heavier weights, to climb higher, to fight harder. When she fell, he offered no hand, only the sharp command. "Get up, Selene," again. And she did, every time. At night she collapsed by the fire, sore and covered in dirt, but something inside her had shifted. The girl who once trembled at thunder now stood under storm clouds, sword in hand, daring the sky to strike her. Weeks passed. Her movements grew stronger, her aim truer. She learned to track footprints, read the wind, blend her scent with the earth to move unseen. The rogues began to look at her differently, not as their alpha's strange human guest, but as one of them. One evening, during a sparring session, she faced Kaelen himself. The pack circled them, cheering softly. She lunged, fast and fierce, surprising even herself with the sharpness of her attack. Kaelen blocked every move effortlessly, until she feinted, twisted, and nearly caught him off guard. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Kaelen's lips curved into a faint, approving smile. "Not bad," he said, breath steady. "You're learning faster than most." "Maybe I just had the right teacher," she replied, panting but grinning. Their eyes locked. Challenge and admiration tangled together in a heat that neither could disguise. The air between them hummed, alive and dangerous. Later that night, as Selene washed the dirt from her hands in the stream, she caught her reflection in the water, hair unbound, eyes bright with fire. For the first time in her life, she didn't see a frightened noblewoman. She saw someone fierce, capable, free. "You belong here," a voice said behind her. She turned to find Kaelen standing in the moonlight, his expression unreadable. "No," she said softly. "I don't belong anywhere. But at least here, I can be myself." Kaelen studied her, the corners of his mouth tightening. Pride mixed with something deeper, unspoken. "Then you're stronger than you think, Selene." And as he turned to leave, she realized his words weren't a compliment. They were a truth she was finally ready to believe. The forest had become Selene's teacher, and her mirror. Each rustling leaf, each whisper of wind seemed to test her resolve. Her hands, once used to holding teacups and embroidery needles, now gripped a dagger with precision. Her dresses of silk had been replaced by leather and wolf hide. Yet the greatest change was not in her body, it was in her spirit. That morning, Kaelen sent her on a solo trial, a test all rogues faced before they were accepted as full members of the pack. She had to travel deep into the misty valley, find the silverleaf flower that grew only near the river, and return before sunset. Alone. "Trust your instincts," Kaelen told her, pressing a small dagger into her hand. "And remember, courage isn't about being fearless. It's about choosing to move even when you are afraid." She nodded, heart pounding as she stepped into the shadowed woods. The forest was alive with sounds, birds shrieking, branches snapping, unseen creatures moving through the undergrowth. Every step demanded awareness, Once she stumbled upon wolf tracks and nearly turned back. But something in her, that same spark that had made her flee her wedding, pushed her onward. Hours passed. Sweat clung to her brow and her legs trembled from exhaustion. Yet she began to notice things she hadn't before. The faint direction of the wind, the subtle difference between a predator's step and a deer's. Her senses sharpened, her body attuned to the wild rhythm around her. When she finally reached the river, it was more beautiful and more dangerous than she imagined. Mist curled over the surface like silver smoke, and there, near the rocks, bloomed the silver leaf flower. She crouched to pick it, fingers brushing its glowing petals, when a low growl echoed behind her. A rogue wolf, larger than any she had seen, emerged from the trees. Its eyes glowed amber, fur bristling with hunger. Selene froze, dagger trembling in her hand. For a heartbeat, fear rooted her to the spot. Then Kaelen's voice echoed in her memory. "Trust your instincts." She steadied her breath. When the wolf lunged, she didn't scream. She rolled aside, striking with her blade. The wolf snarled, claws grazing her arm, but she stood her ground. Her movements weren't perfect. They were raw, desperate, but driven by will. With one final strike, she cut across the beast's flank, sending it limping into the forest. Silence returned. Her heart thundered, adrenaline surging like fire in her veins. She looked down at the dagger, stained, shaking in her grip, and then at the flower she had saved. For the first time, she realized something profound. She wasn't helpless. She wasn't fragile. The girl who once feared storms and nobles' scorn had faced death and survived. When she returned to camp, dirt on her face and blood on her sleeve, the rogues gathered silently. Kaelen stepped forward, eyes dark with restrained emotion. "You went alone?" he asked. "You said I should," she replied, holding up the flower. "And I found it." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Kaelen smiled, not the cold smirk of a leader, but something warm and proud. "You've done more than find it," he said quietly. "You found yourself." That night, the rogues celebrated her return with howls that echoed through the forest. Selene stood among them, head held high, the firelight dancing in her eyes. Inside her chest, something fierce had awakened, a courage she never knew she possessed. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was becoming. And deep down, Kaelen knew it too. The woman who had once run from power was now learning to wield her own. And soon, the kingdom that branded her a traitor would learn to fear her name. The camp had changed since the day Selene first stumbled into it, but not nearly as much as she had. Once timid and uncertain, she now moved with purpose through the clearing, giving commands to younger rogues, binding wounds, sparring without hesitation. Her laughter, once soft and guarded, now carried across the camp like sunlight breaking through clouds. And Kaelen noticed everything. From the shadows near the watchfire, the Alpha stood with his arms crossed, golden eyes tracking her every move. He didn't interfere, didn't correct or command. He simply watched, silent, thoughtful, proud. Earlier that morning, he had seen her teaching a young boy how to hold a dagger. Her tone was gentle but firm. "Don't fight with anger," she told the boy. "Fight to protect. Rage burns fast. Purpose lasts." Those were his words once, spoken to her in the first days of training. Hearing them now in her voice filled him with a strange ache he couldn't name. She had absorbed his lessons, his discipline, and yet, somehow, she had made them her own. When she sparred later that day, Kaelen found himself at the edge of the ring, arms folded, expression unreadable. The rogues cheered as Selene dodged a taller opponent's strike and countered with elegant precision. She moved like lightning, not because of brute strength but intuition and grace. When her opponent finally yielded, the pack erupted into howls and applause. Selene laughed, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and looked up, straight into Kaelen's gaze. For a moment, time seemed to pause. He hadn't realized how long it had been since he'd smiled. But watching her, fierce, alive, unafraid, stirred something deep in him, something that had lain dormant since his exile. "You're staring, Alpha," muttered Rin, his second-in-command, smirking beside him. "I'm observing," Kaelen replied curtly, though his tone betrayed a hint of warmth. "Observing? Looked more like admiration to me," Rin teased. "You used to glare at everyone. Now you stand here grinning like a fool every time she wins." Kaelen shot him a warning glance, but couldn't entirely suppress the faint curve of his lips. "She learns fast," he said quietly. "Faster than I expected." Rin chuckled. "You mean she's starting to scare even you?" Kaelen didn't answer. His gaze drifted back to her, to the fire in her eyes, the strength in her stance, the wildness she no longer hid. That night, while the pack celebrated around the bonfire, Selene sat apart on a fallen log, cleaning her blade. Kaelen approached silently, the crackling firelight catching in his eyes. "You're improving," he said. "Improving?" she repeated with a playful arch of her brow. "I nearly bested your lieutenant." "Almost," he said, smirking faintly. "But you're right. You're no longer the girl who stumbled into the forest that night." Selene's smile softened. "I didn't think I could ever be this person." Kaelen crouched before her, his voice low, steady. "That person was always there, Selene. You just needed a place and a reason to let her out." Her breath caught. The firelight flickered between them, reflecting in her eyes like gold. For a moment she wondered if he realized how his words made her heart twist. He stood then, offering his hand to help her up. "Rest now," he said. "Tomorrow we train with the scouts. I want to see what that fire of yours can do when tested." As he walked away, Selene watched him go, tall, silent, the moonlight turning his scars into silver lines. She didn't know what scared her more, the battles ahead or the growing pull between them that neither could resist. And Kaelen, from across the clearing, glanced back one last time, just long enough for the fire to catch in his eyes again. "She's stronger than I ever was," he thought, "and God's help me. I'm falling for her fire, to strike fear, to draw blood." Darius paced slowly, his every movement deliberate. He was a man who understood theater, who knew that anger could be as persuasive as gold. "The rogues are a plague," he continued, his voice low and venomous. "They steal, they breed chaos, and now they dare steal a noble bride. If we do not act now, their defiance will spread like rot through the kingdom." An older duke leaned forward. "And the girl, my lord? Is she alive?" Darius smiled, a cold, serpentine thing. "Alive. For now. The beast holds her in the woods. But I give you my word, I will bring her back. I will cleanse this land of the rogue filth and return the Lady Selene to her rightful place, at my side." The hall erupted in shouts of agreement. For the crown, for order, for justice. But beneath the cheers, a few faces turned away, uneasy, uncertain. They had heard the rumors too, that Selene had chosen to flee, that perhaps she was not the innocent victim Darius painted her to be. The High Chancellor cleared his throat, his voice hesitant. "My lord, if she left of her own will, the people may see this not as a rescue, but a war of vengeance." Darius's gaze snapped to him, eyes cold as steel. "She was stolen. That is the truth they will believe." He turned to the assembled guards and generals. "Raise your banners. Gather every soldier, every hunter, every man who can wield a sword. We march at dawn." Outside, the bells of the city tolled, not in mourning, but in warning. The streets filled with soldiers preparing for bloodshed, banners whipping in the wind, crimson and gold under the fading sun. As Darius stood upon the balcony overlooking the city, he raised his hand high, his voice carrying across the square. "By order of the crown, we march to cleanse the woods and bring back what is ours. The rogue Alpha will hang, and the lady will be mine again." The crowd roared in approval, but behind the cheers, dark clouds gathered over the horizon. In the forest far beyond, Selene would soon hear the drums of war and realize that her past had come hunting for her. The night was thick with tension. Smoke from the campfires drifted upward, mingling with the scent of pine and wild earth. The rogues moved silently between the tents, preparing weapons, sharpening blades, and whispering to one another. Selene stood at the edge of the clearing, her heart pounding as she listened to the hushed conversation between Kaelen and his scouts. Their words were grave, clipped, urgent. "He's coming," said Ryan, Kaelen's second in command, his face pale beneath the moonlight. "Lord Darius leads an army of 500, nobles, mercenaries, hunters, all sworn to burn the forest to the ground." Kaelen's jaw tightened. "They mean to erase us completely." Selene stepped forward, her cloak brushing the earth. 500? She whispered. "That's not a rescue. That's a massacre." The two men exchanged glances, but Kaelen's gaze softened when it fell on her. "He'll use your name as justification. To him, you're not a person, Selene. You're a cause. He'll slaughter anyone in his path and call it love." Her breath caught in her throat. This was her fault. She had run for her freedom, but now that act of defiance had painted a target on innocent lives. The children who played by the firelight, the mothers who wove baskets under the trees, the scarred men who had only ever wanted peace. Selene's mind reeled with guilt. "They'll all die because of me." Kaelen seemed to read her thoughts. He took a step closer, his voice low and steady. "Don't carry that weight. Darius chose this war, not you." But she shook her head, trembling. "He's coming for me, Kaelen. You said it yourself. If I go back—" He cut her off, his tone fierce. "If you go back, he'll kill you. Maybe not with a sword, but slowly, with chains and lies. That's what men like Darius do." Selene turned away, tears burning her eyes as she watched the camp. The rogues were not soldier. They were survivors, scarred, hungry, loyal only to one another. Against a kingdom's army, they didn't stand a chance. Her voice broke. "He'll burn everything, even the children." Kaelen's silence said everything she feared. The forest wind howled softly through the trees, carrying the scent of rain and iron, and far off in the distance, faint but certain, came the sound of war drums. Selene's fists clenched. "Then I have to stop him." Kaelen's golden eyes snapped toward her, fierce with warning. "You're not going anywhere near that army." But Selene stood tall now, her fear turning into something sharper. "You said I'm not your possession. Then you can't command me." A quiet, dangerous pause hung between them. For the first time, Kaelen saw not a noble girl, not a frightened bride, but a woman who would risk everything to protect others. And in that moment, both of them knew the truth. Selene's choice had started this war, but it would be her courage that decided how it ended. The night grew colder, the wind restless, as if the forest itself felt the tension stirring within it. Selene sat alone on a moss-covered rock near the edge of the rogue camp, her cloak pulled tightly around her shoulders. The moonlight spilled over the treetops, silver and silent, while the faint hum of preparation echoed behind her. The sharpening of steel, the low growl of wolves, the quiet prayers of those who knew dawn might bring death. Her thoughts were a storm. She had escaped the golden prison of Darius's court only to find herself in another kind of battlefield, one where her choices would determine the fate of hundreds. The rogues had given her shelter, protection, even a sense of belonging she'd never known before. But she also knew the truth. This wasn't her fight. If she slipped away tonight, she could vanish forever. She could find a quiet life somewhere beyond the mountains, live free, unbound by politics or bloodlines. Freedom. That had been her dream, hadn't it? Yet as she looked toward the campfires, her chest tightened. She saw children sleeping close to their mothers, wolves curled protectively around them. She saw Kaelen standing at the center of the camp, his voice calm but commanding as he instructed his warriors. Even from a distance, she could feel his presence. Strong, unyielding, but not cruel. He wasn't fighting for power like Darius. He was fighting for his people. Her people now. Selene rose slowly, her hands trembling. Every step she took toward the firelight felt heavier, weighed down by fear and purpose. She stopped when she reached Kaelen, who turned to her with surprise. His golden eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. "You should be resting," he said quietly. "I can't," she replied, her voice barely steady, "because I have to decide who I am." Kaelen tilted his head, studying her in silence. Selene took a deep breath. "I could run, disappear, pretend none of this was ever real. But if I do that, Darius wins, and these people, your people, will pay the price for my cowardice." He stepped closer, his gaze softening. "You don't owe them this fight." She shook her head, eyes glistening. "Maybe not. But I owe it to myself. To stop running, to stand for something, even if it cost me everything." For a long moment neither spoke. The fire crackled between them, shadows dancing across their faces. Then Kaelen's lips curved into the faintest, proudest smile. "Then you stand with us," he said quietly. "Not as a captive, not as a symbol, but as one of us." Selene nodded, her voice steady now. "Yes, as one of you." The forest wind shifted, carrying her words through the camp like a vow. Around them the rogues lifted their heads, as if feeling the spark of something greater. Hope. That night, as the stars glimmered above the wild woods, Selene Aravel stopped being the runaway noble who fled her fate. She became something new, a leader, a defender, a woman who had finally chosen where. If one falls, the other returns. The rogues moved swiftly, obeying without hesitation. These weren't trained soldiers, but survivors. Men and women hardened by exile, fierce because they had nothing left to lose. Selene moved among them, her presence both strange and inspiring. She helped bind arrows, packed salves for wounds, and taught the children where to hide when the horns of war sounded. Every hand she touched, every reassuring word she spoke, strengthened the bond between her and the rogues. Kaelen watched her quietly from across the camp. This woman who had once been draped in silk and fear, now moving through his world with calm determination. There was mud on her boots, ash on her cheek, and fire in her eyes. When she came to him, her arms full of water skins, he offered a faint smile. "You're working harder than my warriors." She set the skins down beside him. "Your warriors believe in you. I want them to believe in me too." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "They already do. You've given them something I couldn't." She tilted her head, confused. "What's that?" "Hope," Kaelen said simply. "I taught them how to survive. You're reminding them why." Selene felt warmth rise in her chest, a fragile, dangerous warmth that had nothing to do with war. She looked at him, seeing not the feral leader the kingdom feared, but the man who carried the weight of an entire people on his shoulders. And somewhere deep inside, she realized she wasn't just standing beside him out of defiance anymore. She believed in his cause. In him. That night, the rogues gathered around a single hidden fire. Kaelen stood before them, his voice steady as he addressed his pack. "They call us beasts. They call us traitors. But tomorrow we show them what honor looks like. We fight not for thrones or crowns. We fight for the right to live free." A chorus of growls and howls answered him, fierce, loyal, unstoppable. Then Selene stepped forward, surprising everyone. She raised her chin, her voice carrying through the night. "You fought your whole lives to survive. Tomorrow fight knowing you're not alone. I will stand with you, not as a noble, not as a prisoner, but as one of your own." The pack erupted in cheers and howls that shook the trees. Even Kaelen's eyes shone faintly with something between pride and awe. As the rogues prepared their weapons and whispered final words to loved ones, Kaelen and Selene stood together at the edge of camp, gazing out into the darkness beyond the trees, the direction Darius's army would come from. Kaelen's hand brushed hers, a fleeting, wordless promise. "Whatever comes," he said quietly, "we face it together." Selene nodded, her heart steady despite the fear curling in her chest. Together, she whispered back, and as the wind rose through the forest, carrying the scent of iron and storm, both knew that the dawn would bring not just a battle, but a reckoning that would decide the fate of everything they stood for. Dawn broke red. The first horn blast shattered the morning stillness, echoing through the forest like a curse. Ravens scattered from the treetops as soldiers in polished armor marched into the mist, their torches setting the underbrush ablaze. Darius's banners, crimson and gold, fluttered like serpents in the wind. The kingdom had come to burn the rogues out of existence. Kaelen stood at the front line, his wolf eyes glowing faintly in the haze. Behind him, his pack bristled with tension, men and women shifting between human and wolf, waiting for his command. But it was Selene who made the first move. She'd studied the terrain the night before, marking every stream, ravine, and choke point. Now, as the soldiers advanced in heavy formation, she used what she'd learned. Not brute strength, but strategy. While Kaelen and his warriors held the front, Selene led a small group of rogues along the ridge, moving silently through the trees. She signaled to the archers to wait until the soldiers entered the narrow glen, a trap disguised as open ground. "Now," she whispered. Dozens of arrows whistled down like rain. The first wave of Darius's men fell, confusion breaking their perfect ranks. Kaelen's wolves surged forward, striking from the shadows. Growls and steel clashed in a storm of sound and fury. Selene didn't stay behind. She dashed into the chaos, helping drag wounded rogues to safety, shouting warnings when archers repositioned, her cloak torn and her hands bloodied. At one point, she snatched up a fallen soldier's bow and loosed arrows with sharp precision, dropping men twice her size. From his place on the battlefield, Kaelen caught sight of her. Standing on a slope, her hair wild, her eyes blazing, commanding rogues twice her age like a seasoned general. Pride, fierce and unfamiliar, surged through him. She wasn't the frightened noble who had once run from her fate. She was the heartbeat of the rebellion. But the battle was far from over. Darius himself rode into the clearing, armor gleaming, fury etched into his face. "Find her," he roared. "Bring me the girl alive. Kill anyone who stands in your way." The soldiers regrouped, pressing harder. One rogue after another fell. The forest burned brighter, smoke rising like a dark cloud of judgment. Selene's lungs ached, her vision blurred from exhaustion, but she refused to retreat. When Darius's men began surrounding a group of injured children and elders, she darted forward, shouting to draw them away. "Over here!" The soldiers turned, and she ran, luring them into the marshy ground she'd mapped earlier. As they charged after her, their heavy armor sank into the mud, trapping them waist-deep. She turned back, breathless, but triumphant. "You should have listened when they said not to underestimate me." Kaelen appeared moments later, finishing the ambushed soldiers with lethal precision. When the last one fell, he turned to her, eyes burning with disbelief and pride. "You outsmarted them," he said. "You saved half the camp." Selene smiled faintly, wiping soot from her cheek. "Maybe all those years at court taught me something after all. How to play games with men who think they're invincible." Kaelen chuckled softly, rare, low, and warm even amid the chaos. But his expression soon hardened as the sounds of war grew nearer again. "This isn't over. Darius will come for you himself." Selene met his gaze, her voice steady. "Then let him. I'm done running." And as the flames crackled around them, the princess and the rogue stood shoulder to shoulder, no longer fugitives and outcasts, but equals in the fire of battle. The battlefield trembled beneath the roar that tore from Kaelen's chest. He had seen many wars, led countless hunts, but this was different. When Darius's sword came down toward Selene, something inside Kaelen shattered. The restraint he'd carried for years, the discipline, the careful control, crumbled like ash in the wind. His wolf surged forward. Bones cracked, muscles stretched, fur burst through his skin. The transformation was not graceful. It was raw, primal, filled with fury and pain. In seconds, the Alpha stood on 4 massive paws, his silver-gray coat streaked with blood and firelight, his eyes glowing molten gold. The soldiers faltered. Some dropped their weapons. Others whispered the old tales. The cursed Alpha, the beast who defied kings and lived. Darius's sneer didn't waver. He raised his blade and shouted, "Kill the monster!" But Kaelen was no longer a man to be killed. He was a storm. He crashed into the nearest line of soldiers, scattering them like leaves in a gale. His claws ripped through armor, his teeth found steel and flesh alike. Every growl shook the air. Every strike was a promise. "You will not touch her." Selene, still catching her breath, could only watch as the man she had come to trust became something ancient and terrifying. Yet beneath the feral rage, she saw the same burning intent, not destruction, but protection. "Kaelen," she cried, dodging a sword swing, "don't lose yourself." But the wolf barely heard her. Darius advanced, sword flashing. "You think you can win her, beast? You'll die like the others, nameless, forgotten." Kaelen turned on him, hackles raised, a low rumble building in his chest. Darius lunged, his blade slicing Kaelen's shoulder, but the Alpha barely flinched. In one swift, brutal motion, Kaelen slammed into him, sending the noble sprawling into the dirt. Selene ran forward, trying to reach them, but soldiers closed in, forcing her back. Kaelen's massive paw pinned Darius down. The wolf's jaws hovered inches from the man's throat, hot breath washing over him. "Do it," Darius spat, defiant even now. "Show her what kind of beast protects her." For a long moment, Kaelen hesitated. His chest heaved, the human part of him wrestling with the bloodlust raging in his veins. Then Selene's voice cut through the noise. "Kaelen, don't become the monster they say you are." The words pierced the storm inside him. Slowly, painfully, he stepped back, snarling but holding himself in check. Darius gasped, disbelief twisting his features. Kaelen's golden eyes met Selene's, wild, trembling, but aware. He had chosen her voice over his rage. Behind them, the battle still raged on. The rogues fought valiantly, but the odds were shifting again. Kaelen's strength had turned the tide for now, yet he could feel his energy waning, the beast within still clawing for control. Selene hurried to his side, touching his blood-matted fur. "You came back," she whispered. He growled softly, not in anger, but as if answering her. For the first time, the princess didn't fear the wolf. She saw in him the same heart that had once sworn to protect the broken and the lost. And in that moment, the rogue Alpha, neither man nor beast, stood as the kingdom's most feared and misunderstood protector. The night burned red with fire and vengeance. The once proud banners of Darius's army fluttered in ruin as Kaelen and his rogues pushed through the chaos, their howls echoing like thunder over the blood-soaked field. Selene stood amid the storm, her blade slick with sweat and ash. Every muscle in her body screamed, but she pressed on. She would not run again. Not from her fate. Not from Darius. At the far end of the clearing, the tyrant himself emerged through the smoke, armor dented, his golden crest scorched black. His soldiers were fleeing, his allies lay broken, yet his rage burned brighter than ever. "You," he spat, pointing his sword at Selene. "You've ruined everything, my alliance, my kingdom, my destiny." Selene lifted her chin, her voice steady though her heart pounded. "You ruined it yourself, Darius. You built your throne on fear, and it's crumbling." He laughed bitterly, circling her. "Do you think these beasts will make you a queen? You're nothing without your noble name and without me." A growl rolled across the clearing. Kaelen stepped from the shadows, half-shifted, his eyes glowing gold, his body radiating fury. His presence silenced the battlefield. "Enough!" Kaelen's voice came out rough, primal. "You've spilled enough innocent blood." Darius sneered, raising his sword. "And you think you can stop me, mutt?" Before he could strike, Kaelen lunged. Their blades met with a deafening clang. Sparks flew, metal screeched. It was no longer a war. It was judgment. Selene could only watch as the two men collided like storm and flame. Darius fought with precision and arrogance, Kaelen with raw strength and instinct. Each blow shook the ground. At last, Darius feinted left and drove his sword toward Kaelen's side, but Selene screamed a warning and Kaelen twisted just in time. He caught Darius's arm, disarmed him, and threw him to the ground. Kaelen's clawed hand pressed against Darius's throat. "You called me a monster." Realized the end of the old order had truly come. Kaelen raised his hand and the noise faded. He glanced at her one last time, a silent question in his eyes. Selene nodded, her heart steady. Together they lifted their joined hands to the sky. The dawn broke fully then, light spilling across the clearing, washing away blood and shadow alike. In that light, a rogue and a runaway bride stood as one, not as ruler and subject, but as partners, symbols of a new age born from rebellion, courage, and love. And in the distance the wolves sang, not a cry of war, but of peace. The war was over, but the real victory was only just beginning. Weeks passed since the final battle. The air over the forest had changed, no longer heavy with fear but rich with promise. Flowers bloomed over scorched ground, and laughter echoed where cries of pain once rang. The rogues had begun rebuilding, homes rising from ruins, hope stirring among hearts that had known only survival. Selene walked through the camp at sunrise, her cloak trailing behind her as she passed wolves and humans working side by side. They greeted her warmly, calling her Selene of the Freeborn, a name she still struggled to believe she'd earned. At the edge of the clearing, Kaelen waited, his back to her, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. The early light kissed his scarred skin, making him look more myth than man. "You still keep watch," she said softly, approaching him. He turned, a faint smile ghosting his lips. "Old habits. The rogue in me doesn't sleep easily." "And the Alpha?" she asked. "The Alpha," he murmured, "has found peace he never thought possible." She smiled, standing beside him. The silence between them was no longer tense. It was calm, alive. A connection forged through fire, through fear, through choice. He studied her quietly. "You've had every chance to leave, to return to your kingdom, rebuild your name. Yet you're still here." Selene took a slow breath, her eyes sweeping over the awakening forest, the home she had once feared and now loved. "When I first ran into these woods, I was escaping a cage," she said. "But now, I see this place was never a prison. You weren't my captor, Kaelen. You were my mirror, showing me the strength I'd buried." Kaelen's jaw tightened, emotion flickering in his eyes. "I never wanted to bind you. Even when the old law claimed you as mine, I swore I'd let you go if you wished." She shook her head gently. "I don't want to be let go. I want to stay, not as yours, but with you." The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of everything they had endured. For a long moment, Kaelen said nothing. Then he reached for her hand, slow, deliberate, and she didn't pull away. He lowered his head slightly, his voice rough but full of reverence. "Then let it be known. No vows, no chains, no claiming rights. Just this." He pressed her palm to his heart. "You choose me." Selene smiled through tears, her voice steady. "And you choose me." Their foreheads met, a gesture older than words, older than crowns. Around them, the forest seemed to breathe, as though blessing the union. Later that day, before both pack and kingdom, they stood side by side. There were no grand thrones, no jeweled crowns, just two souls who had rewritten the meaning of power. Kaelen spoke first. "Let this be our way. Strength not through fear, love not through command, freedom not through escape, but through choice." Selene took his hand and added, "From this day, every bond between wolf and human, man and woman, will be born, not of law, but of will. The people cheered, and the wolves howled, a harmony that had never before existed. That night, under the light of a full moon, the two stood at the center of a great fire circle, surrounded by rogues, villagers, and even nobles who had chosen to stay. There were no priests or crown, only witnesses, hearts, and the soft rhythm of drums. As they kissed, it was not a claim, not a conquest, but a promise. A promise that love, when born in freedom, could rebuild kingdoms. And thus began the new tradition, not of forced unions and broken vows, but of bonds chosen in truth and strength. The story of the runaway noble and the rogue alpha became legend, not as a tale of rebellion, but as the dawn of a world where love could never again be caged.